Right, so this here is meant to be my custom NZXT gaming PC, which I picked up very cheaply, somewhat local, collection only, it's how you get some great bargains. This here was sold to me as cheap gaming PC, 16GB RAM, 750 Ti GPU Windows. That is genuinely the listing, so it tells us a little bit. We've got 16 gigs of RAM and a 750 Ti apparently, but it cost me £35. I've noticed a couple of bits. We have a monumental amount of dents and bits and pieces around here, and a crack on the side. The front panel is dirty as an understatement. Around the back here, we're missing whatever plating was meant to be there, and there's a couple of bits loose, but not the end of the world. And from what else I can see on it, it is running a Z97 motherboard, which is awfully high-end, so there could actually be a good processor in here. In fact, I'm a little bit curious to get this open. Shall we open this up and see what's actually inside real quick? Oh, it's also only got one screw holding it together. It did say cheap, and it was. As I've gone to open it up, I went to twist this off because I thought, oh, thumb screw, there's only one of those. No, the power supply is held in with thumb screws, and there's nothing on the side panel. Easily removable power supply. Let's put that back in. Right, well, we don't have to remove any of these bits because there's nothing holding this on. It just slides off. I was told everything works, and they did offer to turn it on for me, but just for the sake of ease, I wasn't too worried. Maybe I should have asked, because the more I look, the more concerned I am. We're using the second PCIe lane on the graphics card. We've got mismatched RAM running in single channel, HyperX kit. This one's not even secured in. RAM's RAM. As long as it works, that's fine by me. Good to have the pen there. Very small cooler on a Z97 board. I've just noticed and is concerning. I'm hoping this translates well to camera because even with my own eyes I didn't notice it. This fan has no blades or top. That is just the copper being shown there. But everything else looks kinda right-ish. Don't hold out much hope. This is so questionably built. Oh, we have a green light. Push on. Ooh, we have blue. Oh, and it turned off again. And it's back on. And it's turned off again. Is it shorting on something? It's like it goes to post and then turns off. Oh, this could have been a bargain, but I don't think it is. I believe we're in for a wild one today. Step one, I want to take out this graphics card. Seen better days, anyone? That has been in here for a while. Without the graphics card, what does it do? Not the graphics card. This may be the problem, is this stick of RAM. I don't know why this is plugged in down here, but it is. So we're going to keep it there and just keep the system as it was sold for now before we start messing with more stuff. This should now turn on. Okay, it does work. Okay, that's good. Does it have an operating system? What are the rest of the specifications? I've got to get a keyboard out. Thank you, Henry. An i3-4170, so Haswell Core i3. We got 8 gigs of memory that we know works and 8 gigs left to put back in. We got an SSD. The graphics card isn't showing up in here. Have they shipped it? Have they sent it without graphics drivers? Yeah, there's no graphics drivers, which means the graphics card could very well be dead once it installs drivers, which doesn't fill me with hope. I mean, if it all works, even the case alone is worth 35 quid. Right, we'll put this back where we found it. Yeah, it will not boot with that RAM stick there. I don't want to put it in dual channel because they didn't ship it with dual channel. I wonder if it's got like bent pins on the board and it's messing with the memory channels, which is why it's been given to me in single channel. Was it just dirty? CPU or memory change. Okay, that works. We will see if it survives 3D Mark in this awful configuration it's in now. Right, we've got 5 minutes left on the drivers. Let's Steam update, and then we should just be able to have drivers and 3D Mark running on the system. A few odd things like the fan up here just being, oh, that is getting hot. I don't like that. Can we unplug that wherever that's going? Because that is getting very hot. Is that it? Yeah, that turned off the system. Well, the specs have now loaded in, so we got the 750 Ti, which looks to be an Asus variant, which I believe is overclocked. It has also got the 6-pin on it, so that should be good. No clue about the PCI Express bandwidth it's running at. I'm going to guess 4 times speed. We've got the Core i3-4170, 2 sticks of DDR3 running in single channel at the moment. Given how awful this setup is, 7 to 8 FPS, this PC may very well be able to still run a lot of modern games just as is. Unfortunately, I did mess up the audio for the next section, but we did make it through 3D Mark absolutely fine. There was a couple of weird dropouts from the graphics card, but I mean, look at the state of it. This thing is for some reason operating in the bottom slot, and I still don't quite trust things, which is quite relevant for what's coming up. At the end of the day though, the system was working, but we were clearly hampered in a couple of areas. One, the system was absolutely filthy, and two, it was just so poorly put together, and I don't mean any disrespect to the previous owner at all, but there is an exposed copper fan element, which is heating up cobwebs, producing the smell of burning. You don't really want that in your computer. So it is a fire hazard, it is filthy, and it just needs taking apart and putting back together. So that's exactly what I did. I took the entire system apart and I aimed to clean up absolutely everything. Because it needed a few more standoffs on the motherboard because it was just touching bare metal. There was lots of odd quirks that didn't quite make any real sense. And at the end of the day, I don't know how old the thermal paste is on this system, and what other weird things are occurring. So I went through thoroughly. I took the entire system pretty much apart, I had all the cables out, there was random cables routed that were also exposed, so I snipped those off, found where they were coming from, took them out of the system. They just didn't need to be there. It was the wiring for some LEDs that had been put in. I'm not too sure if they came with the case or if they've been added afterwards, but those blue LEDs, they were gone, because the wiring for them was just exposed out of a Molex socket, which to me, that borders on being a fire hazard. I don't really care for the aesthetics that much if it means my computer could catch fire. And in the end, we had the system looking really rather nice. It took much longer than I would have expected, but the system was all there and was working a-okay, up until it wouldn't turn on again. Bit of a weird one. So I've been cleaning out the PC, trying to actually get it in a state where it's normal. I mean, look, it has a new fan in the top, no dust, and the RAM's in the right place. But then it wouldn't turn on to the stage where the actual I/O panel controllers here aren't even plugged in, because I was trying to jump it with a pair of scissors to see if maybe I'd dislodge them. I'm very confused. It wouldn't turn on. And I've walked away, had a cup of tea, and it's now on. I hate cleaning computers that I've not built, because you don't know if something janky's been done, because that's the only way it works. All I did was walk away and it didn't even have front panel connected. That's what's messing with me. Look how thickly baked on that dust is. So I'm just going to give this a clean and then put it back in the system. Hopefully that is now everything. So the computer's been cleaned, it's been set up properly, I know the computer itself works, the graphics card is cleaned, all new thermal paste, all the wiring is sorted, all the screws are sorted, we should be good. So the question is now, does it turn on? We've got no display. I know I got ahead of myself actually screwing in a graphics card. This is why I never bothered to do it. Just unhappy. We know it's not the computer. The computer turns on with another graphics card. It can't have died from being cleaned. Was the filth structurally integral to the graphics card? Or does it just not work in this slot, which is why they've moved it to that bottom one? If we get a signal out of it immediately, we know where the problem is. Fans are ramped up, screen's now giving a black signal. Weird things happening with this system. It's been a while since it's happened, but yep, this 750 Ti must have been hanging on by a thread, because after a very delicate clean, nothing. No signal out of it. VGA, HDMI, DVI, it sounds like it posts. There's no visible damage to the board. There's no visible damage at all. It was just filthy. I say we whack in something that's equivalent. I've got an R7 270, which is kind of like a 750 Ti. These are about £10. But yeah, getting it to this point anyways taken longer than expected, purely because it just wasn't built very well in the first place. Admittedly, this is a lot of computer for 35 quid. This is a good basis to work from, and it does need graphics card upgrades and bits and pieces like that, because the reason I bought this is to upgrade and get rid of. I don't need it. So we'll get a baseline score, then I want to overclock this as much as it'll go. I don't think there's much tweaking we can do on the processor side. We can disable Spectre and Meltdown, get some performance increase that way. We can debloat Windows 10. There's still 25 quid. I mean, it's a shame to have lost out on 25 quid's worth of the computer, but at the same time, the RAM is pretty much worth 20 quid. That processor fan is getting very loud. So pretty much an AMD Sidegrade is what we've done there. I have, however, off screen got this 750 Ti looking absolutely immaculate. It looks brand spanking new. So we're going to give this one last shot in the PC. It has apparently posted, but I'm not seeing any display. I feel like I'd be doing a disservice if we didn't try everything in our power to get the 750 Ti working again. Moral of the story is, I shouldn't have touched it. Something seemed off. I should have just put it to one side and put it back in filthy. It's detected a VGA signal because it swapped itself over to VGA. It's unfortunate. I'm gonna say the 750 Ti is dead. From what I remember, Haswell doesn't respond well to this at all. Previous overclock failed to run. Yeah. Run it like that. Use as much power as you want. Max out the core clocks. Max out the memory. So that's overclock, spectrum meltdown, debloat. I think we're just gonna get rid of pretty much everything. I can't see much on here we actually want to keep. Well, performance looks great. I mean, ignore the temperatures of 100 degrees on the processor. We actually did get quite an increase in the score, but our processor's gone down. Why? It's overheating. So for all those people that are used to fancy water cooling, welcome to the original hell. These Intel push pins, can you see? Number 1 is in, number 2 is in, number 3 is in, number 4 clicked, but look at that. It's not actually in. That should be making better contact now. That had all clicked in from the other side, but needs immense amounts of force to actually go through again, because these are worn and nasty and broken. So now I get the joy of testing it again, but this time hopefully it's not going to overheat. And then we will finally have our score. I've spent too much time on this already. I don't even really need this PC. It's taken the best part of a day to get here, but we finally have the figures that we're running with. That one clip has brought us down 30 degrees. I don't think there's much else we can do here. I do want to try launching a quick game of something. That's a new hip popular game people are talking about. I know nothing about this game other than it's quite well optimized, but I wonder if this 35 quid computer can actually run it. If people want to watch a video on the graphics card we're using, they genuinely are £10. Right, so it is running with low settings, but it's hitting around 35 FPS already. And the processor's still got breathing room, surprisingly. And that's on a Core i3. It's the graphics card trying to do everything. Okay, I'm a little bit surprised. I'm a little bit impressed. It's not the 750 Ti, but as we are well aware, that did have problems. I mean, it doesn't look fantastic, but it doesn't look terrible either. Right, I'm calling that a success, to be honest. It's got a pretty good time spy score. It's running modern games that are on the top of the Steam charts. I say we carry on with the rest of the video. So just to recap over this all very quickly, we got a cheap PC off eBay, I went and collected it, I should have asked for it to be tested, not that it really mattered too much, but it wouldn't turn on, turns out one of the RAM sticks was slightly hanging out where it wasn't clipped in. Then after a little bit of testing I thought, you know what, something smells slightly like burning, and it was the fan that had no fan blades left on it, and the copper elements were burning the cobwebs. After then tearing apart the entire system, cleaning it thoroughly for multiple hours, turns out there was exposed wires just hanging out of Molex connectors to power some LEDs. Other than that though, we got the system thrown back together, and then the 750 Ti it came with refused to turn on, which was a bit of a bummer, but the system was now clean, it now worked, and it now didn't smell like burning when we used it. So just what are the full specifications of our custom-built eBay PC that we paid £35 for? Processor-wise, we have the Core i3-4170 with 2 cores and 4 threads at 3.7 GHz. You can try and overclock these, but usually most people manage to get around 100 MHz extra out of them, with plenty of extra instability, so there's not much we can do there. Our graphics card was the legendary 750 Ti, which mysteriously has stopped working, but we will be testing that again later on in the video. And then we also have the R7270, which is something I've thrown in as a bit of a side grade. It was quite the equivalent to the 750 Ti back in the day, but it used more power and ran a lot hotter. They're about £10, so it's a good like for like to actually just test the system. RAM-wise, we've got 16GB of DDR3 running at 1600 MHz, and I would estimate this system was built anywhere between 2014 to 2016, which is sort of when this case was popular on the market. Storage-wise, we've got a 120GB SSD, which is an integral one. It came running Windows 10 Pro that we've debloated and removed Spectrum Meltdown from, and most of all, it was just questionably put together. But we got this full system for just £35. And after all this time spent getting the system ready, getting it cleaned, spending all of this time troubleshooting, just what increase did we get from this tweaking around? Well, in its stock configuration we saw 1335, which was predominantly brought down by the graphics card being left in its stock state. These 750 Ti's are usually set up pretty moderately from the factory, which results in a slightly lower score than what you'd expect. This is also a DirectX 12 benchmark, so not something it fares fairly well in. Moving to the Radeon, which at the time was about the same power power as the 750 Ti, but as time's gone on, being a DirectX 12 benchmark, does actually net us a slight increase of around 200 points, and then with the system all set up, we gained another 300 points overall, mostly from overclocking the graphics card, which was mostly just increasing the power limit because it's an OEM version. At the end of the day, the processor wasn't really too hampered in any state it was in. I can add in the result of when it was thermally throttling, which was probably our worst result, but even then, there's not a huge deal of disparity between all four of them. So at the end of the day, the i3 does benefit from a debloat, spectre, and meltdown and bits and pieces like that being all set up properly, but to be fair, it's not exactly a huge increase, 500 points overall, but a lot of this is just from overclocking the graphics card and fixing the memory. Now, a PC like this is certainly an interesting one, because this is obviously an older, budget-build PC, albeit one with some fairly questionable components. Using a Z97 board just to whack in an i3 is an interesting one. But what I've gone through and done is worked out how much it would cost to throw a system like this together today, more so just to show you the advantage of buying these pre-built computers, admittedly ones that you may have to rebuild if you actually want to use them. But in total, at least the prices on the market today in February, well, the end of February 2026, a motherboard like this sells for about £22 because it is at least a Z97 one, 16GB of DDR3 roughly goes for anywhere from £16 to £20, you can pick up 120GB SSDs for about a fiver, the 750 Ti is actually one of the most expensive components and costs about 25 quid, the NZXT case is about £10 if you collect locally, you can pick up a Core i3 like this for about 50p, and oddly enough the power supply is a surprisingly expensive item, costing at its best price around £15, but I've seen them selling up to £30 over on eBay and sometimes more. Power supply prices are kind of insane, and this is a good way to get a hold of one. In total, to build this PC, roughly would cost you about £77.50 if you're just taking the prices of the individual components. Today here we got them all for £35, and yes, we did have to rebuild the system, so we didn't exactly get the ease of use, but at the same time it was at least a complete system that was easy to get a hold of and didn't cost us very much money. But at the end of the day, with this system, the way we've managed to get it working, just how does it perform? Is this a good idea, and is this the cheapest way to actually get a semi-competent gaming PC? Well, I've taken this computer and I've spent the full day running it through all of the benchmarks that seemed appropriate, some modern ones, a couple of classics, but just to really throw it into the 2026 experience. So just how is our rather sketchily put together NZXT PC for 35 quid performing in the benchmarks? Starting off the benchmarks, we have GTA 5 Enhanced Edition with the latest release running with high and very high settings plus HBIO. Unfortunately, very high was just too taxing on both the processor and the graphics card and resulted in mostly just dips under 30 FPS, but to try and keep it above, these settings did work and returned us 36 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to the 31 FPS mark, which really aiming for 30 FPS on a Core i3 seems to be the best idea. When you move into the world of online though, which was in a fully packed lobby for some reason, and we even saw a higher frame rate than this, then again, GTA Online Enhanced Edition is actually relatively well optimized, and we have the advantage that there is less going on, meaning we returned 45 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 36 FPS. You could argue the frame times were slightly worse, but at the same time it did feel smoother to play, so GTA 5 isn't a problem whether you want to play it online or in single player. You can quite comfortably enjoy it on what is a £35 system. Yes, we've side-graded the graphics card, but I'd imagine a 750 Ti would get similar-ish results here or there. If not, this is a £10 graphics card upgrade. However you want to class it, it runs pretty well. Moving over to Counter-Strike 2 though, and things do get a little bit interesting here, mostly because the base of this system is showing its age. We saw with competitive settings in 1080p 112 FPS on average through the built-in benchmark, with 1% lows down to 88 FPS, which sounds pretty stable and pretty good. The thing is though, you quickly realise we are still very CPU limited here, as dropping the resolution down to 720p doesn't net you a major increase in performance, instead seeing slightly better 1% lows up to 98 FPS and an overall average increase up to 128 FPS. So you're looking around slightly better 1% lows and a 20 FPS increase overall, but you lose a lot of resolution doing this. And how do I know we're so CPU limited? Well, one, this game doesn't deal with hyperthreading very well, especially on these older Haswell chips, and two, when we drop over to a newer map like Nuke, well, we've seen the graphics card, which we've tested before, deal with this absolutely fine. But the Core i3, that saw us drop down to 68 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 47 FPS. And you might be noticing utilization over on the left is a little bit sporadic. You'd think it'd be at 100% churning out these frames, especially given that it's an offline match with bots, which if anything, is more intensive than the full thing. But at the same time, no, it's just one of those weird instances where this is the maximum this game can utilize this processor. It does get me a little bit curious if maybe later on we should go and test this without hyperthreading, or maybe look at the i3 more, but it is one of those weird things with Counter-Strike where simpler maps and scenarios are going to be playable on an older system like this. When you get into more intensive maps and more intensive scenarios, well, things go out the window a little bit as the game can't utilize these old hyperthreaded cores as well as it should do. Now, we did test Arc Raiders just after we installed the graphics card and finally stopped the system overheating and actually got everything working together coherently while it was all tuned up, but as I've come to understand, and the more I've benchmarked Arc Raiders today, this beginning section is not really reminiscent of the overall performance of the game, and it took a little bit of tweaking to find the optimum settings that will run on what is quite a cheap computer. I mean, at the end of the day, this is a £35 system, and the fact it is able to launch the game is impressive. And at first I thought, well, the graphics card seems to be our limit, but no, that Core i3, even with a 30 FPS cap in place, is a major limit on the system. When you're actually out and about in more open areas, the game generally averages 29 FPS with 1% lows down to 24 FPS, all while utilising low settings with FSR set to performance mode. And yes, I did go around and try a lot of settings, and for some reason, this was the one that felt the smoothest and worked best. You wouldn't think it with the overhead of FSR being added in, but for some reason it just resulted in a smoother overall average frame rate, probably because it was putting some degree of load on the graphics card. At the same time though, you could probably just about get away with this if you were desperate enough, but this is about as good as it gets. Lower resolutions don't help, they just result in more stutter, and even just native resolutions like 576p running on a system like this, well, the graphics card isn't our limit apparently, it is all on that Core i3. So the Arc Raiders performance, just about playable in a pinch, but really you'd want to get away from that i3. Up next we have BeamNG, and I can safely tell you that even on a Haswell i3, which is a bit more modern than the dual cores we usually test, well, the game does still take an abnormally long time to actually load in and stabilise, especially on maps like the jungle. Simpler maps, not too much of a problem, but ones like this, yeah, it can take a little while. But with a mixture of medium and high settings on the jungle map, we saw 34 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 28 FPS, which overall is actually a really solid result, but one that you did have to wait a couple of minutes for the game to stabilise down to. The thing is though, to try and put some more load on the processor, because it wasn't having to do all too much at the moment, I did add the traffic into the game, which did take around 5 minutes before the frame rate actually brought itself to a level that I considered playable, something I wasn't considering it was going to do. I just assumed it was going to stay at 100% utilisation and stay around sort of 20 to maybe 25 FPS, but no, eventually it did calm down and we returned 31 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 24 FPS when we had the traffic enabled as well. So BeamNG, even on the intensive maps, you can have graphics settings enabled and the traffic turned on and still see over 30 FPS on a £35 gaming system. PUBG was another one of those games where I thought, well, we're not going to see it be playable here. Even with all the workarounds and tweaks, we've known some fairly competent systems struggle. But this one, well, maybe it's the really quite high single clock performance of the Core i3, but it actually went pretty good. I mean, don't get me wrong, the first game you start on the system will crash and then you'll have to rejoin it, and then there is probably a 15-minute buffer period on your first time playing where the game is downright uncontrollable and unplayable. You'll get network problems because your frame rate's so low, you won't be able to actually control it, but after this went away,
the game does stay to a surprisingly close to 30 FPS figure. You have to use low settings in DirectX 11.1 and an external 30 FPS cap. There was no Microsoft Defender running because that would harm the performance. There was no Explorer.exe running because that would harm the performance, and the game was also set to high priority. That's what you've got to do, but once that's all done, well, it actually ran pretty good. I mean, I wouldn't call it amazing because, well, I mean, all the while there wasn't some stupidly high-poly car on screen. I'm guessing this is part of a brand collaboration. It pretty much did run at a locked 30 FPS and was quite controllable. So PUBG, as painful as it is to say it, as long as you don't mind setting it up and waiting on your first time launching it, well, it actually worked pretty good. Now, this one is as brutal on the processor as it is on the graphics card. As much as I love that little Radeon, Cyberpunk is not the kindest to original GCN cards. It's not very nice on Nvidia's Kepler cards of the era as well. It is one of those games that it looks great when it's turned up to its maximum settings and doesn't look half bad when it's turned down to low. And the built-in benchmark indicated it was running fine. But as all of us know by now, this can be very misleading compared to real-world gameplay. With low settings and a 30 FPS cap in place in 720p though, we were just about able to eke out an average of 29 FPS, with 1% lows down to 24 FPS. Which may not sound playable, but once you keep in mind the price tag of the system we're using today, well, I could probably say you could eke out a probably quite okay playthrough. The lowest frame rate I was able to get the game down to by causing the maximum amount of havoc possible was around 18 FPS for a split second. Generally the game bounced between 24 and 30 FPS pretty consistently under heavy action, and when not much was going on, it pretty much stayed locked to 30 FPS. Once again, this isn't fully the fault of the i3, it's not doing great here. I mean, Cyberpunk doesn't really like dual cores, but then the Radeon is also struggling as well, so this is about as close as I could get to playable. Whether or not you would consider this playable, it really depends on if this is your only choice. If you wanted to play Cyberpunk and this was your only option, it is controllable, it is playable, and I got around 12 minutes of gameplay where I got carried away with whatever I was doing, and it was definitely controllable, definitely playable, so I can't really argue with it if it was your only option. Next up we have Bannerlord, which of course is a modern title, but one that is incredibly well optimized and apparently functions very well on a dual core with hyperthreading. Yes, we did have to set the battle size down to 200, but this didn't stop us from turning up the rest of the graphic settings up to medium and high in a nice 1080p resolution. Our first run was a little bit stuttery in places, which is something that does happen on AMD cards. I doubt this would have happened on the 750 Ti, but that card doesn't do anything at the moment. But still, at the end of the day, this is very reminiscent of what you'll see in a late game battle, and you're seeing well over 40 FPS most of the time, with 1% lows down to 36 FPS. So I'm going to say Mount & Blade Bannerlord from all of the early through to late game, even on what is a £35 computer that was probably built about 10 years ago now, it runs fine, so there's no problems there, not that I expected any in the first place. A PC like this though likely would have been thrown together to run plenty of Source games of the era, probably Counter-Strike Go, Garry's Mod, and we're going to try the latest and greatest of Source games with Black Mesa, which we ran with the high preset, running in DirectX 9 as it wouldn't launch with Vulkan here, with the Zen level test, which is about as intensive as the Source engine gets from my experience. We saw 78 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 56 FPS, primarily caused by when AI would sort of load on screen for the first time, and would then quickly disappear. That was the only noticeable hitching and stuttering that occurred. One of these highly clocked Core i3s deals with games of this era, which is sort of what it would be designed to run, absolutely perfectly. And I can only imagine with the 750 Ti in here, it would have been an absolute monster for running all those games of its era. But still, even when we push it far in that, it runs great. Next up is a tricky one for a multitude of reasons. Baldurs Gate 3 does not particularly like AMD graphics cards and will not work with the Vulkan mode anymore, so that resorts us back to DirectX 11, which does actually have more sort of overhead on the processor, which also cannot deal with Baldurs Gate 3 very well. With a 30 FPS cap in place, the game was controllable, but was liable to stutter quite a lot and take a while to process what was going on, even in these early stages of the game. we returned 27 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 19 FPS. So not a bad showing, but not exactly what I'd call a playable experience. Given its turn-based nature, you could get away with this, but I've been told that as the game progresses, it gets a lot more intensive than this, so neither the graphics card or the processor is really cut out for it. More the processor than the graphics card, though. This is one that is always requested because it's always in the top 10 on Steam with Rust. And as we know, it has got a lot more intensive, so how is it dealing with an old i3-based gaming PC, the type of thing you could grab cheap off eBay and just, well, I'd say use out of the box, but, you know, if you get one like mine, it may be a fire hazard, but you probably could get away with finding systems like this quite easily. And you can just about get away with playing it with 30 FPS on average, provided you're running with a capped frame rate and the low settings. We did also turn textures down to quarter size rather than half size, just to try and free up a bit of VRAM. There was times though where the game would seemingly just cut our frame rate in half after opening containers, and then about sort of like 20 seconds later it would return back to our 30 FPS average. Rust is not really designed for hardware like this these days, so it's nice to see you can still just about get away with it in a 1080p resolution, keep in mind, but it's not as good as what it once would have been. Probably back in this machine's heyday, it would have dealt with it okay back then. Fallout 4 is an interesting one because back in the day, a 750 Ti and a Core i3 machine is pretty much bang on what you would have built for this type of PC, and given we're using an AMD equivalent, that also did perform quite well in Fallout 4. But with the latest anniversary release, which I haven't included in the little thumbnail down the bottom left, but it is the latest anniversary version, we ran the game with high settings in 1080p and still returned a great frame rate with 57 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 48 FPS. As always, this is done in one of the most intensive areas in the game and does include combat and bits and pieces like that, and as you can see when we enter some of the less intensive areas, the game is running at a completely locked 60 FPS. So Fallout 4, it would have ran great on this PC back in the day, and even after the anniversary update, does still deal with a system like this very well. And honestly, a 750 Ti deals with DirectX 11 so much better than its AMD equivalent does, that I reckon you could probably eke out a smoother frame rate if we were able to use the original graphics card. I don't want to focus on legacy tests too much for a system like this because, let's be honest, it was a PC that would have been mid-range back when it was built, and of course it deals with games of its era absolutely fine, as demonstrated by Tomb Raider. We ran it with the ultimate settings plus Tress Effects enabled 1080p resolution and returned 52 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 46 FPS. I included this just to sort of remind people this PC was built for these types of games. In a similar vein to Fallout 4 and Black Mesa, it dealt with games of its era perfectly fine. It's only now as we move forward that we're seeing odd things happening here because we were limited entirely by the graphics card in this. The processor had so much more to give and we only had 2 cores. But finally, can it run Crysis Remastered? That's right, we're actually testing Crysis Remastered here. Well, with low settings in 1080p, the game seemed to be pretty much trying to target 60 FPS, so I just let it work like that, and we returned 59 FPS on average, with really decent frame times down to 56 FPS. One thing to note, Crysis Remastered doesn't have a quick save system, so every time I benchmark this, I have to play through to the section that we benchmark just to be able to do it, which is a monumental pain. Apparently there's a mod that's released that fixes this, but if anyone's tried it, please do let me know, because I would like to test the remastered version a bit more. Still, it looks excellent with low settings, but that is about where this system places today. I think Crysis Remastered is a good example. You would have gone from running the original in 1080p with very high settings at 60 FPS to entering the modern day running games with low settings and even 720p or 1080p, because if we turn things up to high settings, it sort of tells the story itself. We now see 15 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 10 FPS, with such hideous amounts of motion blur at these low frame rates that I could hardly see what I was doing. But yes, Crysis Remastered will run, but in a similar vein to most games of this era, they are going to need lower settings to do so. So, overall performance of our cheap £35 computer. And, I mean, yes, the benchmarks have been particularly brutal today, but yes, we could have gone back and benchmarked games from 2013 to 2015 and it would have done excellent. But then again, we already would have known that, which is why we're throwing it up into the modern benchmarks. And to be fair, I do think it has done an admirable job, because think about it, for 35 quid, if you've got a computer like this, tidied it up a little bit, then you've got a computer that can still run a lot of popular titles out there, even some that you wouldn't think it could, at pretty playable frame rates. Now, things like Arc Raiders and PUBG, those large multiplayer games, you are looking at 30 FPS and questionable frame drops in places, more so in Arc Raiders, which is a very new title. I wasn't even expecting that to launch. But when it comes to a lot of games out there, GTA 5 Enhanced Edition works perfect, whether it's single player or offline. Counter-Strike 2 in simpler maps and scenarios was fully playable, albeit newer ones do suffer with the hyper-threading. And then you've got titles like Rust, where if you don't mind a 30 FPS cap in place, you're still getting away with playing them. At the end of the day, some of the well-optimised titles like BeamNG, M&B Bannerlord, and even Crysis Remastered, which is pretty well optimised to be fair and looks great with its lower settings, all run absolutely excellently. It's only those latest and greatest titles where you're seeing those frame drops, and it's not even really the graphics card, I don't think. I think it is primarily the 2 cores of that i3. And let's be honest, 2 cores, it's an old standard and it's something that we've long since abandoned. So I'd say for 35 quid, that's some pretty good performance and definitely passable for what you've spent on the system. I'm not going to go too in-depth on the thermals because, let's be honest, the thermals on this system don't seem to have been a priority at all. I mean, look at the minuscule size of the cooler that's been bunged on here. I'm fairly sure that is smaller than the one that Intel would have shipped with the Core i3 back in the day. At the end of the day, the processor was around 70 to 80 degrees when gaming or under full load. This Radeon, as we've well established in its own dedicated video, is an abysmal design. It looks dead cool, which is why I bought it. But these OEM versions, they clock high, and when you remove the power limit, they perform well, but it will run anywhere from 85 to 95 degrees when gaming, and in a Furmark stress test, will run at 100 degrees. And this thing is running cleaned with fresh thermal paste. They run hot. So yeah, thermals, not too important here, because at the end of the day, you're more focused on the price to performance rather than how hot the system's running. So these Radeons will run hot, and that Core i3, even with the little power it does use, does deserve a better cooler. There are definitely going to be a few extra questions though, so what we've started doing in these later parts of these videos is I try and answer almost a little bit of everything, so I had a couple more questions I wanted to answer. That GTX 750 Ti, I've cleaned it and I've left it 24 hours. I wanted to find out, had it miraculously revived itself? Because I'd already spent 2 hours meticulously cleaning that thing with isopropyl alcohol, a Q-tip. It looks immaculate, it looks brand new. So I wanted to answer that. I wanted to take another look at the 750 Ti because it did come with the system, and I do want to make a video on that card. I've never done one. And I also had another question. If you take one of these sort of cheap £35 custom-built PCs, are they given a new lease of life by if you throw something like Linux onto it? So I've gone through and answered both those questions, and you can join me for the ride. But there's 2 last things I want to do. I want to try putting the 750 Ti in again, a final time now it's been left for a full day, to see if it does absolutely anything. I do think this is dead. And then I want to do a quick Linux test. Let's be honest, it's not the most exciting computer in the world, but honestly, now it's all cleaned up. It's quite a nice system. I've not really had any problems with it. It's been a pain to get it to this point, but I suppose that's the joy of this channel, is we don't give up. 750 Ti is back in. Is it completely dead? I doubt it's mysteriously resurrected itself overnight, but I've had graphics cards do this before where they seemingly are dead and then they start working again. It works. There is a cruel irony to this world that for some reason the 750 Ti now works again. I have done nothing to it. All I've done is clean this card, and then it wouldn't work all of yesterday. I've got so much footage trying to get this to work, and I've left it a day, mysteriously turns on again. This is the same card. It has been sat over there on the side of the room. I hate it. I hate it. It works. It seemingly works. What does MSI Afterburner say? 750 Ti. It's running nice and cool. Of course it is. The card is pristine. It looks mint. I got nothing. I got absolutely nothing. This is not how this section was meant to go. What was meant to happen was I plug the 750 Ti back in and it doesn't work. And we go, oh, that's okay. We have this Radeon. We can run Linux. I hate it. I spent so long trying to get this card to work. No, it's literally fine. Right, let's just load a quick save on Fallout. I mean, it's running Fallout 4 here with the same settings we're using on the R7. I've done no tweaking, no overclocking, nothing like that. And it's getting around 40 to 55 FPS. About where I expected it to, because with an overclock, this would probably come close to 60 FPS. It's already getting close to 60 FPS. It will deal with games like this perfectly fine. Well, we finally have a 750 Ti on the channel that we can take a look at and test. I bet when I take this out of the system, it will never work again. I just recorded some voiceover for one of the benchmarks where I say, oh, it's a shame about the 750 Ti in this game, because it would have ran great, and it does run great, it runs perfect. Sometimes computers are weird, and this is one of those prime examples, because nothing about that should have been fixed or working. The card was on its last legs, so I cleaned it up, did it thoroughly, got it all nice, put it back in, didn't work. Thought, you know what? That's fine. We'll give it a more thorough clean it all up again, try it in another system, try it in the second slot of another system, try it in the second slot of the PC it came out, try it in the first slot of the PC it came out. Nothing, no life, anything. Tried VGA, tried DVI, tried HDMI, tried all the possible display options. Nothing. Come back after 24 hours, put it in the system, works fine. Works absolutely bloody fine. It looks immaculate. I'm going to show you now how clean this card is. It looks brand new. As you can see, I have gone to town on this. The shroud is clean. The fan is clean. The board looks like it's just left the factory. There's not a single mark on it or anything, and it wouldn't work. Even the ports look immaculate and have been fully cleaned out. So yeah, we now have a 750 Ti that works fine apparently and looks immaculate. I guess we do a video on this because I'm not going back and retesting it today because it will perform pretty much the same as the R9 did, within reason. This will probably perform better in things like Fallout. The R9 will perform better in things like GTA because it's DirectX 12. They are literally a side grade for one another, more or less. I have no words. The only thing that I can say that I hadn't done was leave it on top of Noel Gallagher's High Flying Birds EP, where it's been sat on top of like this 24 hours. That's the only change. But Linux time. This is fun. I don't want to do too much with Linux. I just kind of want to run it on here to see kind of how it performs. The one thing this entire setup has got me curious about is the performance of that Core i3, because it is the weirdest chip I've come across. I mean, I used an i3, I used a Skylake one for years, and there was a period of time where we just advocated for, if you're doing a budget build, 2 cores, 4 threads, that's more than enough for most titles. And the stark difference where this is the limit to suddenly that is the limit. Have we ever seen an era before where you can have a period accurate system and then suddenly out of the blue the processor becomes more of a limit than the graphics card does? It's been a while since that's happened, because when you think Core 2 Quad era, if you ran a Core 2 Quad and 8800 GT, as we saw last week, the Core 2 Quad can still just about get away with things. Good luck running anything on an 8800 GT. The fact a mid-range card of its era has outlived the mid-range processors of its era is such a weird thing to have happened, and it's all down to those 2 cores, so I really want to look at that in its own little video. I doubt it will be an epic long, hour-and-a-half long thing, but that has got me curious. If you watch these sections, you're here for the rambles. But we'll get Linux thrown on here, make sure it's running up-to-date drivers. I'll probably load on some games overnight, and then we'll return in the morning to do a little bit of Linux benchmarking. Probably only a very small amount. Don't look at this as a very Linux-centric video, because this was a system that would have been designed to run Windows 10, and it runs Windows 10 fantastically. It will run Linux fantastically as well, especially with that AMD card in there. But at the end of the day, this is more just like a fun little bonus bit. It's just an extra bit added on because we all like to see how it does in Linux, and it's just curiosity. So we'll get this installed and come back after it's all ready. Probably fairly obvious, but we're at the Linux dashboard. So if we run NeoFetch, if we take a look here, we are running Elementary OS. We've got the i3 4170, we've got the R7 370, and it recognizes that we've got 16 gigs of RAM. So that all looks to be set up and working absolutely fine. Worth mentioning, of course, Linux runs absolutely fine on here. So if you wanted to browse the web and go, I don't know, Vauxhall Cavaliers sale, it works speedy, there's no problems. It's not exactly noticeably snappier than running Windows 10 or Windows 11 on a PC like this, because it's not ancient. You know, it's not exactly an old computer, like in terms of what we look at on this channel. So yeah, it benefits, but I am just going to get Steam installed on here, load some games on overnight, because that's going to be the easiest way of doing it, see how it gets on. Now, I have gone through and updated the AMD drivers over to AMD GPU from Radeon, just because otherwise performance is downright terrible. And so far, starting off with GTA 4, which I just thought, I'll download it because I always have problems getting this running on Windows, and I'd heard good things about it running on Linux. So far though, honestly, it looks absolutely fine performance-wise. It's about what I'd expect for this PC. The graphics card is running with a power limit, it's OEM one, and performance here with the very high settings is around sort of 40 to 60 FPS, which is about what I'd expect from GTA 4. It's not exactly renowned for its optimizations, but yeah, it's a good one to start off with. Usually one of the main issues we have with GTA 4 is the frame pacing when you get in a vehicle just goes out the window. And it's not exactly amazing here, but it is noticeably better than it is over on Windows. But even then, I'm not really going to complain about performance here, so GTA 4 is a good place to start with. Working fine. We got the AMD GPU drivers all confirmed and working. That's one of the reasons why I already had it launched up. So why don't we try something else on the system? Next up, just a little bit of Skyrim. This is one that we've seen work really well over on Linux. And performance here in Skyrim, even with the limitations on the system in place, pretty much a fully locked 60 FPS. I mean, this is kind of a given. This is the original release that only really uses about 2 cores. So having 2 cores that run at very high clock speeds with good single core performance, and we are seeing absolutely no problems whatsoever here. So as I was saying before, yeah, legacy gaming performance over on Linux is pretty much fantastic. But it's just another example of why a system like this could be good for Linux. If you are looking at some legacy gaming, especially DirectX 9 era stuff, it tends to work pretty fantastically, even with ultra settings. So Skyrim, I'm going to say that one isn't a problem whatsoever. I don't think we've benchmarked Just Cause 2 for absolutely ages. I have no keyboard controls for some reason. Mouse works. My keyboard does not. Is this a Linux problem? Okay, now I can't access the game. Right, I'm going to try and change Proton version real quick. See if maybe that's a Proton problem, because I think it could be. Unfortunately, I could not get Just Cause to work. It just would not work properly for me. So I tried different versions of Proton, I tried setting it up externally from Steam, I tried different things. It seems to be a documented problem on Linux with Just Cause 2, but I'm sure there are workarounds, but unfortunately I've already spent about 45 minutes on it and nothing was working for me. So we're here with the MasterChef collection, which is something we haven't tested in quite a while actually, but we're running Halo Reach with a mixture of medium and high settings, which is what it defaulted to. I've got to say, it looks absolutely fantastic, and isn't a game that I thought was going to run particularly well on Linux, given its Microsoft origins. It must be said, I'm currently playing through Halo at the moment on an original Xbox, so this is going to spoil it for me a little bit because I got used to about 12 to 30 FPS in 480p, and now I'm playing it in 1080p with ultra settings at a pretty much locked 60 FPS. Now this is running wonderfully, to be honest. This is kind of what I'm talking about with Linux, especially on these old Radeons, is I do need to go back and do some dedicated testing, but you do gain quite a lot of performance from running Linux. Even in titles that, I mean, I don't remember this running this well over on Windows the last time I tested an AMD graphics card like that. Admittedly, my memory is a tad fuzzy because we are probably nearing in on about 7 years ago, and it did not seem this smooth. Then again, the game has had a lot of updates since then, so it's quite tricky for me to say where the performance increase is coming from. It could be optimization and patches, it could be the AMD GPU drivers on Linux, which does appear to be the case at the moment, but even on a basic system like this with a Core i3, nice high settings, fluent frame rate, I'm going to say, yeah, Linux on a PC like this, provided you run the games that you want to run on it, you know, it's still going to work well over on Windows, as we've just seen. But it does appear that Linux does really work well on a system like this, which has got me curious to test that Core i3 out, because I don't want to do a huge look back on it, but at the moment there are people getting into Haswell and they're getting into it via things like i3 systems, so maybe they are still usable and Linux does breathe some new life into them, because processor wise we have so much overhead. We have got so much overhead and we're running at a locked 60 FPS. Good Linux experience this. Not really anything to complain about. It works really well on one of these mid-2010 systems that you can pick up for 30 quid. So I think we call it there on Linux. I'm happy with that, and I think that's been some overall great performance. So our £35 NZXT computer, and what are my thoughts on the system? Well, for 35 quid, it's actually remarkably good value. When you part it out, building a system like this with parts off eBay and CEX would cost you on average anywhere from sort of £70 to £90. And that's ignoring the fact that you probably wouldn't use an i3 in it. At the end of the day, you get a lot of parts that you can upgrade from, and that's what we're going to be doing with this system. I want to build it into a sub £100 gaming beast of a PC, which is why I got a hold of it. So I've already got a few bits and pieces on order, and we are going to be seeing this system again. Because after that, I'm not going to be having it anymore, it's going away to someone that needs a new computer. So there is a good reason to get a hold of these cheap computers, we've established that. But other than that, it has been a lot of fun making this video. The Linux performance really did surprise me. At the time of doing the voiceover, usually I finish off Linux testing in the morning after it's downloaded a few games, and the only real hassle I had with the system, and thankfully there was a forum post from 2018 where they'd ran into the same problem I had, and then after I found that, well, I was able to work through it from there. At the same time though, this has been good value, it's been a bit of fun, and I think it's a good basis to upgrade the system from. So I hope you've all enjoyed this video. This week has just been a week of fun videos that I sort of wanted to make, so I picked up this computer, primarily not even to feature on the channel, but it's been a fun thing to make a video on. And on the other hand, that Core 2 Quad video we did at the start of the week, also very fun. So I've had a lot of fun making videos this week, and I hope that does show through this. I do want to, however, take a more serious tone for a second and say that Core i3 in here has got me awfully curious on how obsolete they are. We throw around the word obsolete, and usually it's one of those, well, you can get away with a few things. But a Core i3 like this, you can easily get them in pre-built or custom-built systems like this for dirt cheap. So how good actually are they? How far can you push a system like this without touching the processor? So I do think we will be taking that out to look at. But anyway, thank you all very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and good night.